Good morning, everyone. Can we rise and pray? Those of you that are able, Lord, we thank you for your steady hand on our lives, Lord Jesus, through the ups and downs and through the mountains and the valleys. Lord, we do look to you to understand your word in a deeper way, and I ask that you organize my thoughts and I've got words written down, but guide what actually comes out, Lord, and help your thoughts to be able to come through an imperfect vessel. In your holy name we pray. Amen. You can be seated. I'll probably go back and forth. So, I hope everybody can see this. Thank you. Okay, this diagram will make more sense over time, but hopefully that's probably not big enough. Let's see if I can write it a little bit bigger. Okay, can everyone read that word? It's sobriety. And that's what I'd like to talk about this morning. And for our first verse, I'll do one quickly here. It's 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7. I'll be passing through a lot of scriptures here. But we'll start out just as a starting point. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7. But the end of all things is at hand. Be therefore sober and watch unto prayer. My title is A Closer Look at Sobriety. My subtitle is What Are You Laughing At? So, and again, I think that will be clear as the hour goes on. But, we talk about laughing, and there's scriptures that talk about it, maybe on both sides, but I want to just go through what laughing is as kind of a subtopic, but with sobriety being the main thing. So what does it mean to be sober? Here we actually have two words in the Greek that are commonly translated into sober in this particular verse. Be therefore sober and watch unto prayer. I won't spend too much detail here, but sober, that first word in 1 Peter, is also translated to be of a sound mind, sensible, or that's more the definition, to be of a sound mind and sensible, serious. And it's translated as in Luke with a man that was healed with many demons. I think Legion was the one that was inside, and Jesus cast those demons out. At the end, he was clothed in his right mind. Also, 2 Timothy 1:7, we have not received the spirit of fear, but of such and such, and of a sound mind. Titus 2, verses 2 and 5, that word is translated temperate and discreet. And then we have the word watch. It's another Greek word, but it's also translated quite a bit into sober. And it means calm and well-balanced. Keep that in mind, that word well-balanced, because I'll probably go back to that at some point. So I think that'll give us a little bit of idea of what sobriety is, but I think if we can even take it a step farther, what is sobriety not? Or what does it mean to be drunk? I'll use that word. So what's the first thing we think of when we think of being drunk? Raise your hand. What gets someone drunk? Anybody?
Too much alcohol.
Yes, yeah, too much alcohol. And I think in the scriptures, that's the most common point of reference, I guess. And there's certainly other things that we would agree that make you intoxicated and give you that same effect as well. Drugs can make the escape very strong, even to the point of hallucinations. But what happens when we are drunk with alcohol? Again, raise your hand. Maybe I should have had the usher come and bring mics, but just yell it out if you like. What is it like? How would you define being drunk? What happens when you're drunk? Ephraim?
Out of touch with reality.
You're out of touch with reality. Very good. Yeah, that would be probably the biggest thing that comes to mind. Anything else? What does someone do when he's drunk? Josh? Lack of impulse control. Yes, that's right. Yeah, we've got that filter which tells us when we're sober. We've got this filter that tells us, even the world says, you don't do this or don't do that, or don't say this or don't say that. When you're drunk, those filters just kind of drop, and you say or do things that ordinarily you wouldn't do when you don't have alcohol in your system. And like I said, there are drugs that can make that escape much stronger, even to the point of hallucinations, and those kind of drugs can get pretty scary, and not that alcohol can't. But let's move aside from drugs and physical substances, and let me just share my experiences. It was about 25 years ago. I watched one of my favorite football teams, the Atlanta Falcons, go to the Super Bowl for the first time. And I remember that moment when they beat their opponent, and tears came to my eyes. I mean, I was that wrapped up with that. Is that sobriety? Don't say yes. I think, even though I wasn't drunk, I was at least not with alcohol, and no physical substance was in my system. I don't even know if I had much caffeine at that point, but something happened to my sense of reality then, or my sense of what's important and what's not. And it was really skewered just because someone kicked a ball at the right moment between two goalposts. So there are other things that can make us drunk, if I can expand the definition, besides alcohol and besides drugs. Fear is something that can be intoxicating. It can grip our minds, and it can cause us to do or say things that we wouldn't do otherwise. So drunkenness, if I can use this word, can take on a variety of forms. But in all of them, we lose touch with reality to some degree. So what do the scriptures say about our state of mind as a general rule, and what should it be? I'm going to at least try to begin to cover this, because it's a pretty deep topic, and I don't want this. I would love, our cell group is going to talk about this on Wednesday, but I would love more conversation about this, because it is such a deep topic, and because I don't want my words to be the completed sermon. But I do, at the same time, I do want to just take a look at the scriptures and try to see, and I'll go back to this analogy, and try to see some patterns that we can guide our lives by. Luke chapter 6, verse 21 and verse 25. I won't go through that entire passage. But hey, if we have a chance to turn there, Luke 6, 21, and then it ends with verse 25. Blessed are ye that hunger now, for ye shall be filled. Blessed are ye that weep now, for ye shall laugh. Verse 25, woe unto you that are full, for ye shall hunger. Woe unto you that laugh now, for ye shall mourn and weep. Interesting. Let's continue there with Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Verses 2 and 4. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 2 through 4. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. If you would just go on the streets of Ephrata, or just go online, or just drag up 1,000 people and ask them whether you would rather have sorrow or laughter. I mean, how many would choose sorrow? 100? I doubt it. Maybe, I don't know, depending on who you would run into, maybe 1%, I don't know. But it's definitely not going to be the majority. And not only that, I think just by asking that question, you're going to get a lot of strange looks. And what kind of question is that? But yet, if you would have asked Solomon, he would have made it clear it's better to go to the house of mourning. Why is that? When we mourn, something happens to our perspective. We get an eternal perspective. We're reminded of the fact that our life here is but a vapor, and that we'll all meet the Lord afterwards. We're spiritually awake. And yet, our culture presses hard against these things. And one of the things that really dominates our pop culture is what Solomon calls mirth. And that mirth, if that's not a very familiar word to you, I want to maybe substitute that word with amusement. And I want to write that down. I think that's what I'm doing here with this diagram is just to define the two ditches. We're going to call this mirth because it's a smaller word and it fits better in this little gap. But amusement is fine as well. I might just expand this a little bit here. This is the ditch on the other side, and we'll talk about that later. Does anybody know, and this is kind of an obscure question, but who is considered the father of comedy? If you don't know, that's fine. I would have never known before doing any research on it. It's not Shakespeare, for those of you that think Shakespeare might have been the answer. It was a man called Aristophanes. And he lived roughly about 4 or 5 centuries before Christ. He was a Greek playwright. So what characterized his plays. I think he wrote 40 of them. Maybe, I think 11 of them got more I don't know if they survived longer or exactly what happened, but it got more prominent. But what characterized his plays? Satire. Do we know what satire is? Maybe some of us don't, that's fine. It's just kind of putting, I don't know if I can describe it well or not, taking someone and just kind of making a joke or a caricature out of them. Like, sometimes if you've ever heard, comedy routines that maybe kind of portray the president and kind of in a silly way, I think that would probably qualify as satire. Second one would have been lewdness, just sexually suggestive talk. And the third one would have been strong political criticism. So, getting to today, what makes today's comedy industry so popular? And it's huge. And it's been huge for a while. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that, we, over the last, at least in my lifetime, we've lived in relative peace and prosperity. And so, comedy seems to, at least in the world as a whole, seems to kind of come up out of that. But what makes today's comedy industry so popular? I would, having experienced some of that, I would say laughing to such an extreme that we as people in God's image lose our dignity. And I think we all have a picture of that, just somebody that's just out of control. I'm not saying laughter at all, but I'm saying it's just somebody that's just out of control, foolish, maybe the class clown if you ever had one in, growing up. And then also what makes today's comedy industry so popular, things that are obscene and dirty, in which many cases take sacred things and bring them down to the profane or the common. And it's where we get our word profanity. It's taking something that's sacred, that has a lot of, good sacredness to it, and then just bringing it back down to the just commonplace and kind of making a joke out of it. That's where we get our word profanity. And then also portraying people in a way that makes light of important people. And I kind of mentioned it before with the president. A lot of your comedy routines imitate important people in such a way that really kind of bring them down. And I want to mention 3 names. And the comedy industry is huge. But I want to mention 3 names, and it's try to connect the dots somewhat between some of them. And this would be the extreme, but I think they're worth mentioning. John Belushi, Chris Farley, John Candy. Raise your hand if you have heard of them. Okay, Gary, yes, Brent, good. Yeah, I've heard of all 3 of them. Not as Belushi would have been before my time. I remember Chris Farley. All 3 were very popular and successful at being able to make people laugh. I mean, they were good at it. They were incredible as far as the talent, if I can use that word. 2 of them would have starred on the same show, but about 20 years apart. That would have been Belushi and Farley. All lived lives that were out of control off camera. Drug addiction, eating disorders, and that was, I don't know how common that was, but it was to some extent definitely part of their lives. And all 3 died early deaths due to those out of control lives. It kind of reminds you a little bit of what happens to rock music and rock musicians, especially in the 60s when that whole scene really came to the surface. Maybe not quite as common, but yet enough to, at least that got my attention. There was something that was even called the Saturday Night Live curse, that, that kind of, some people made more of it than others, but two of these, Belushi and Farley, were on this show Saturday Night Live, and many others died early deaths too, probably a handful. But despite that, American society looks a lot to these broken cisterns such as drugs, rock music, maybe professional sports, to find shelter from life, to find an escape. And for many, comedy is sought as a shelter. So where do we go from here? Solomon encourages us, and I've got that labeled in this ditch here, stay out of this ditch, the house of mirth. Solomon instead takes us to the house of mourning. So what does that mean? Do we stay in perpetual mourning? Is that what Jesus and Solomon meant when he says, "Blessed are you who weep"? Well, I guess just for example, take the two couples that are going to be getting married at the end of the month and try to convince them that their life should be mourning. And that's just not going to fly. And it's definitely not the direction I want to go here. But there is a place where, getting back to the word sobriety, we need to see things as they are, as difficult as it may be. It can be overwhelming. We see, for example, sin's impact on the world. Maybe our own sin, but maybe just as a general, just looking out in society. How sin has grabbed a hold of maybe some places more than others. Jesus says that few find the narrow way, which in itself is tragic. We see the innocent harmed by the sin of other people. We look into history, we see things like the Holocaust, we see the Rwandan genocide, we see the war in Ukraine and Israel, we see ISIS and the horrors that they inflicted on the Yazidi people. And there's a part of us that wants to run away. It can become unbearable up to a certain point. But let's not stop there. I don't think that's Jesus' intent and Solomon's intent, even when certainly not God's intent when he says mourn. And where the turning point is in Matthew 5, verse 4. You don't have to turn to it, but it's out of the Beatitudes. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Jesus promises comfort to those who are willing to embrace life's difficult realities and, as it is appropriate, to mourn. And he promises and provides comfort better than the artificial comforts and the escapes of our pop culture world. Look at this passage in Psalms. Actually, it's the whole chapter. Psalms 126. Psalms 126, verses 1 through 6. When the Lord turned again the captivity of Zion, we were like them that dream. Then was our mouth filled with laughter, and our tongue with singing. Then said they among the heathen, the Lord hath done great things for them. The Lord hath done great things for us, whereof we are glad. Turn again our captivity, O Lord, as in the streams of the south. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. He that goeth forth and weepeth, bearing precious seed, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. What can mourning do? I didn't do a lot of research, didn't really do any research itself, but I trust, and I think I've sensed it just from experience, mourning brings physical healing and strength to move on with life. For example, with the loss of a loved one. Mourning is something that you don't stuff. I was encouraged, when mom and dad passed away, not to stuff it, but just, hey, when the time comes, grieve. And so that would be one. Mourning for the losses of the world can bring about motivation to do something. David Brainerd, who knows David Brainerd? Who's heard the name? Yeah. I think he was more remembered, down in Tennessee, with maybe, I don't know if it's seminary or college, but he was he was a missionary to the native Indians. And he lived, I think his life was cut short just before he turned 30 years old. What was his life like? It was a heavy one. And I think maybe people have wondered, was he a little bit too far, maybe a little bit in this ditch that I've got on the right side? I don't know. That's possible. And none of us are perfectly balanced. I know I'm not. But with the heaviness and depression, at the same time, his life was a life of fervent prayer and service for those that he was ministering to. And I trust his life, I didn't get much detail, but I trust it made an impact. And also not only with the Native Americans there that he was ministering to, but also just missionaries that went after him. And his legacy lived on. So now, let's get to this ditch on the other side. Is there a ditch on the other side? I don't know. This diagram here, I think it can apply to other things as well. Possibly money. I think there's maybe a healthy balance between greed and just living a self-absorbed lifestyle on one hand and just taking in all that you can. And there might be a place in which you don't even see money's value and the potential for doing good things with it. And so you avoid it as much as possible. I'm kind of throwing those things out. But I wonder if there's a healthy balance of, and I don't know what you'd put that word there instead of sobriety, but I think you get the idea. And I think probably if you look at a lot of other aspects of life, it kind of follows the same pattern. There's a ditch on the right side that I think we do well to have more sympathy for those in that kind of ditch because a lot of it is done in sincerity. And yet, I do sense that in so many of these parts of life that Jesus encourages us to be on the higher ground. And I trust that's what sobriety is. I'll admit, some of you know me, I've definitely spent time in that ditch there, but yeah, I kind of tend towards that ditch on the right. We need brothers to help us walk through how to gain that higher ground. But let's go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I will read verses 1 through 4. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. And if we could go back to 1 Peter 4:7, that word watch, and I'll be a little detailed here, but it says well-balanced. So when I think of well-balanced, I guess I come back to this diagram. And we want to be careful not to get get too far off to the left or to the right. So where does seriousness get off track? I don't know. I'd be open to your word. Or any thoughts that you had. I don't know what word to put in that ditch. I could put heaviness. That might be in, and I guess I'll put that for now just to give us something to look at. But if you have a better word, feel free to shout it out. Somber? Hey, let's try that. And we can think about it for a while too. At least somber is shorter. Fits better in this little gap. Somber. All right. Second Corinthians 5:8. Or pardon me. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. It's commonly thought that this passage is talking about the man that was excommunicated in 1 Corinthians. And even if it's not, I think the principle is clear. Second Corinthians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. But if any have caused grief, he hath not grieved me, but in part, that I may not overcharge you all. Sufficient to such a man is this punishment, which was inflicted of many. He's talking about the punishment that was given probably in 1 Corinthians. So that contrariwise, you ought rather to forgive him and comfort him. Look at that word comfort again. Lest perhaps such a one be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow. So even in a man's sin, and that sin in 1 Corinthians 1 was serious, it wasn't God's heart that this man lived. I don't know how long that man had that punishment inflicted on him, but the goal is restoration. We've talked about it many times. The goal of punishment is restoration. And at the end, comfort to a man that, he didn't deserve it, but neither do we. Wherefore I beseech you that you would confirm your love towards him. So I think, as far as to get some balance here on sorrow, how much of our life is sorrow, well, I think this gives us a picture. And obviously we could talk about the fruit of the Spirit, love and joy and peace and those things, and that's how much does sorrow play into that. Certainly it's not, when you look at those things, it's definitely not a life dominated by sorrow. Where does seriousness get off track? And again, we can add after this. If you have thoughts, maybe it looks like we'll have some time, the way things are going now. But a perpetual heaviness, a lack of joy. And one thing that I want to note is families not functioning and bonding well. I mean, if you see that nature in a father, something can easily go wrong with that family, or a mother too. You don't want to be, that is probably one of the biggest dangers of being in that ditch on the right, is the impact it can have on your family. And also, when you see a man or a family buried in heaviness and a lack of joy, is this sobriety? When you see a family like that or a person, are they walking in the realities that God has given us? And his presence is the fullness of joy. Can we call that drunkenness? Maybe of a different sort? I think you could. So, as we progress, again, my subtitle is, what are you laughing at? Because I sense that laughter is kind of what's the word? A symbol, or an expression, a manifestation of where we are. And again, I'm definitely not saying I have all the answers here, but the Bible does tell us to compare spiritual things with spiritual. So that's what we want to do. How many of you know someone that rarely or never laughs? Yeah. Okay. This is a quote. I don't know if he's a Christian or not, but I'll at least read it for some perspective. The man who cannot laugh is not only fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils, which I guess are just evil things similar to treasons, but his whole life is already a treason and a stratagem. Robert Frost, if we couldn't laugh, we would all go insane. And here's observations on my end. Being single, I can bounce around a little bit and travel a little bit more. And I've gotten to know a lot of people in our general circles, including ministers, all the way from the conservative end to the liberal end. And I'm hard-pressed to find a man who didn't laugh or didn't have some real sense of humor in my interactions with them. And the rare exceptions, I have questions in my mind about how their lives ended up in their families. Job 8:20-21. Behold, God will not cast away a perfect man, neither will he help the evildoers, till he fill thy mouth with laughing and thy lips with rejoicing. So is the question, should we laugh or not? Maybe is it rather, as my subtitle indicates, what are you laughing at? Because there is a difference in the laughter of the fool, that laughter of the house of mirth, compared to the laughter that I see in believers anyway. So in kind of recapping some of the things that I already said before, what should we not be laughing at? Foolishness. Laughing to such an extreme that we just lose our dignity as human beings. In child, we talk about a child and we don't want him to be foolish. And there is a place. I mean, there's also a sense you want to let a child be a child, but there's also a ditch of foolishness too. Also, things that are obscene, dirty, and as I had mentioned before, take sacred things and then bring them down to the profanity, that type of thing. And also a couple that I don't think I've mentioned yet, or at least strongly, people are tearing down or laughing, at people in a way that tears down and mocks others. And then also laughter of the proud. And that's talking about James 4:9. Let's read that. Let's start with verse 6. But he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Be afflicted, and mourn, and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. Now, righteous laughter. What is that? Did Jesus laugh? I mean, it's kind of a strange question to ask. We don't see it in the scriptures, at least that I know of. And yet there are many aspects of Jesus' life that we don't see in detail. But let me go to this verse again. Blessed are ye that hunger now, for ye shall be filled. Blessed are ye that weep now, for ye shall laugh. So I think at the very least, there's going to be laughter in heaven. But should we also take it to the here and now? And these are just questions to ponder. Is righteous laughter simply an extension of joy? Maybe like a Gary that's done some research could answer that question about how laughter and joy are related. Did Jesus laugh when Zacchaeus was converted? I mean, that was a big deal for Zacchaeus, as in bondage to money and to what he had done, being a traitor to his Jewish countrymen. I'm assuming he was a Jew. And did Jesus laugh out of exuberance? I don't know. It doesn't say. Did Jesus laugh when he held the little children? I'll just leave that question to you as well. And also, just in our personal lives, is there a place to laugh at our own inadequacies? I'm not necessarily talking sin here, but just our little quirks, I don't know, just forgetting forgetting that you put your glasses on top of your head. Little things like that. Forgetfulness, we could probably make a pretty long list. And also, I want to at least lift up and have us consider the power that healthy laughter can have to bind, especially in a family. And I'm sure you families have had moments, families that are doing well probably can look at many, many times where you laughed as a family. And that, something about that, I'm not sure, what it could be for over a variety of things, but the bond that it creates in family life and also in a congregation. So there's another side of the coin that are really, again, I probably tend, again, more towards this ditch on the right side, but yet I want to lift up things in the scriptures that really tell another side of the story. Note the contrast also when we think practically here as far as drawing lines. Where do we laugh? Where do we not laugh? What's appropriate? Well, and then just talking about sobriety in general, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 18. And be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess, but live a self-disciplined life. And we do need to live a self-disciplined life. And I'm trying to think of other examples of what I want to put is, but let me just say what it says here. The answer is being filled with the Spirit. The remedy that God gives for drunkenness of all types would be to be filled with the Spirit of God. Galatians 5:16. Walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Walk in the Spirit, and you will not fall into the house of mirth. For the flesh lusteth after the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that you cannot do the things that you would. But if you be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law. Does this mean we're free to laugh? Maybe, again, it's depending on what we're laughing about. Judge for yourselves. Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. Against such there is no law. So if we keep our eyes on Jesus and get to know him in a more personal way, I would suspect that when and why we laugh will take care of itself. That's my thinking. The Spirit of God, as we look to Jesus, the Holy Spirit will give us wisdom and power to avoid ditches on both sides. So in closing, let's take inventory of our life. Where are we in this diagram? Do we live our lives in the house of mirth? Do we live on the other side with a heaviness that drains those around us? Wherever we are, let's simply heed God's loving call to ascend to higher ground in the very top there. God bless you.